Hello, everyone. We have got one of our keynotes coming up. Get ready. This is going to be absolutely epic. Food trucks in the back. Remember, influencer tent over there. Michelin men. Anybody found one yet? No one's found any Michelin men from the scavenger hunt still? Come on. Okay. Anyway, well, now we have a legendary venture capitalist, investor, member of the Tesla and SpaceX world. We've got Steve Jurvetson from Future Ventures. He's going to be interviewed by John and Kelvin. He was an early investor in Tesla and SpaceX, was actually on the board of Tesla for many years. He was one of the earliest investors before it was clear Elon would be successful, before anyone knew who he even was. So Steve has an incredible ability to look past the future, or look past the present into the future. And I feel like we know how much Elon Musk has changed the world. It seems like a lot, but I feel like we're just getting started, and there's no one better than to paint the full picture of the future. So with that, I'd like to give everyone, bring their hands together for a super warm welcome for Steve, Kelvin, and John.
Woo! What's up, everyone? We're super excited to be kicking off one of our keynotes with Steve. So first off, Steve, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We finally brought it to the Bay Area, so I think this is, close to home for a lot of us, obviously being here in the Bay Area. But let's just kick this off. What sparked your early interest in science and technology growing up?
Well, this goes way back to like when I was 6 years old, to be honest. I've been a geek my whole life. And first book I ever bought was a chemistry book. And the inspiration for me was my dad. He became a U.S. citizen because of the semiconductor industry in 1966, of all things. Motorola was setting up fabs in Arizona, and he was an inspiration for me. So like when I applied to college and they asked, who are your heroes? I said Steve Jobs and my dad. And then that excitement and interest in technology really blossomed in 7th grade with an Apple II computer. It had just come out. And I programmed a lot of games and wrote, things for kids to play with, and wrote a word processor and a bunch of other stuff. And that, for a lot of folks who get a taste of computer science, is like a taste of magic. It really empowers you to think about the world algorithmically and to think about building products in code, which is just as flexible and powerful as it sounds.
Yeah, Steve, you were one of the youngest partners at a major VC firm like ever. So can you talk about some of the career trajectory points that kind of shaped your career early on?
Sure. Yeah. So I started in venture capital exactly 30 years ago, which is kind of crazy, this month. I first met Elon Musk in that first year, by the way. It was January 1996. I'll come back to that later, because I didn't invest in his first company, Zip2. It was kind of like two ships passing in the night. We both remember that meeting, but neither of us had any business connection at that point. And to your question, though, the first major, career beneficial move that I made was to enter the venture business at all, to be dedicated to trying to get a job somewhere, anywhere. And of the options I had, to go for the most entrepreneurial firm. There were just two other partners. I was to be the third. So they were willing to give me more leeway, right, to act like a partner sooner. And then the timing, just fortuitous timing. 1995 was a spectacular time to start as a venture capitalist. Probably no better starting year you could pick, because the internet just came in full-fledged. And so the major decisions that affected my trajectory were A, deciding to enter the business when I did, B, joining a firm that was entrepreneurial and allowed me to become a partner in 6 months, and then the internet, where you could invest like on, cat years. Everything was happening 7 times faster. And then there was another one, maybe more important though, because this predates anything to do with Elon or any of the companies that are of interest to folks in the room. There was that transition from internet-focused investing to deep tech and one-of-a-kind companies that are changing the world, and the Teslas and SpaceX and Neuralink and Boeings and all the Elon companies we've invested in. And that transition really occurred in late '99, when I was getting terribly bored that every internet company started to look the same. At the time, we called them B2B exchanges, or B2C, business to consumer internet companies. And specifically, there was like 4 business plans I got for selling pantyhose on the internet. That's all they were gonna do, pantyhose on the internet. And I'm like, this is surely a sign something's wrong in this industry. and one of them gets venture backed, Gazelle.com, and I'm like, this is nuts. I'm gonna go like Monty Python skit now for something completely different. I'm gonna pivot hard out of the internet, no more internet investing. It's not because I thought it was gonna crash, it's just boring. And the wisdom within that I didn't appreciate at the time was this idea of novelty seeking as an investment thesis. Finding things that are unlike anything I've seen before, yet adjacent to where I've been. And that's been my guiding thesis for the prior 20 years now. And that got me out of the internet at just about the peak. Not because I could call the peak, but just it was boring. Got me out of the first wave of clean tech investing when it all started to look the same. Same for a variety of other sectors that have come and gone. When the crowd is rushing in and every entrepreneur under the sun is coming out of the woodwork without necessarily a passion for what they're doing, and they're just flooding the market with new startups, it just naturally has me moving on because it's crowded with sort of copycats. So that pivot towards novelty seeking helped me become an investor in Tesla and SpaceX, which we'll talk about. It helped me have a lifetime of learning because I'm always learning something new. And now at this point in my career, I feel like there's more dynamic change than ever.
Oh, yeah.
And I could imagine doing this for another 30 years, no question. And that's pretty rewarding.
That's cool.
You've studied electrical engineering and worked at companies like Next and HP. How did those experiences inform your investing philosophy?
Yeah, it was an adjunct to being a geek. So first off, it was a random walk. It wasn't premeditated, like, oh, I'll do these to become a VC. I didn't know VC existed, by the way, when I was doing these jobs. So I started with chip design at Hewlett-Packard. I worked in product marketing at Next and Apple. And that was just because Steve Jobs was my hero. I wanted to work with Steve Jobs. So that was like, boom, I'm going to follow that curve. Worked in management consulting at Bain. None of them clicked like, oh, this is my calling, or this is what I think I'm best at, or I could imagine doing this for 30 years. Not even close, right? Not even 5 years could I imagine doing any of those jobs. And so I was a little stuck. When I went back to business school, I was like, what do I really want to do in life? And through some serendipitous paths, end up learning about VC. But to your question, that precursor technology foundation, I mean, by the way, even started a PhD in electrical engineering focused on neural nets, which, coming back to AI later, is the precursor of how we build AI today. I did not finish that PhD. But with that foundational technology competence, I felt like I could understand all the companies pitching us. It's not like, oh, that's too technical, or that's beyond me. At least whether it was right or wrong, I wanted to understand at a deep fundamental level, what is going on here? What is the novelty? What is the breakthrough? Is this a technology vector of the future? And then all the investment themes that we've been pursuing at my current firm and when I was at DFJ are really, I'm trying to follow what are the technology trends underlying startups. So it's not like business focus, like what is a customer segment that's unserved, what's happening in a given sector of the economy. It's more like, what is AI doing for us? What is synthetic biology capable of? What is the power of evolutionary algorithms and iterative algorithms in general? So very abstract kind of technology vectors and trends. That's a different perceptual prism for what's going on in the economy. And as technology increasingly defines the economy, I think that's a good way to think about it that's differentiated and such. So in short, chip design helped us invest in chip companies. So my first public company, I think, was an optical integrated circuit company called Neophotonics. Other AI chip companies that we invested in long before AI was a sector. So it allowed me to spot novelty and feel competent enough to move forward in a sector before any other VCs were. So by definition, when we're investing in Tesla, they don't have a whole slew of offers. They had like one other term sheet. Same for SpaceX. There were no other offers that anyone was making. And in fact, for about 2/3 of the companies I've invested in, they had no other competing term sheet. It's just me or just not getting funding.
You've talked about some founders, Steve Jobs being one of them. So what's the most important thing that you've learned from Elon?
So many, and I'm still learning. I almost want to make a meta point just off the top of my head about learning itself. But the first thing I learned, and it's hard to miss, but it became almost the founding premise of our new firm called Future Ventures, is the power of a compelling mission. I want to make sure we don't underestimate that. When someone shows up at work at Tesla or SpaceX or any of the companies, they understand the long-term dream, what the company looks like 20 years from now. There are many startups for which that is not the case, right? In fact, I ask entrepreneurs always, what does your company look like 20 years from now? And you get usually one or two pretty diversely different answers. Either like, thank God you asked me that question. That's the thing I've been wanting to talk about all day. Or they laugh and like, what do you mean 20 years from now? I'll be on my third startup by then. Right? Like, this is not my passion. I don't even have a dream of where I'd be in 20 years. So a long-term mission, making humanity multiplanetary, ushering in an era of sustainable energy and transportation, aligns employees in the long term. So if you just say we're going to want to maximize shareholder value, which is a very vapid and vacuous goal for a company, and ostensibly that's what they're supposed to do, no. People are going to debate endlessly, well, this quarter, this year, this decade, which of these are we optimizing? Because you get different answers of what we should be doing, and a lot of disagreement will break out as to what's a priority. Whereas when you have a clear mission, it aligns people, and then you chain back to the present and think, what do I need to do to get here from there? So that was one of them. The second one I'll just mention more briefly is what I alluded to as process learning, this idea that the machine that builds the machine, as a metaphor, the rate at which you can run experiments in that learning loop is the ultimate determinant of success. So even if Grok comes in later as a starting gun, if it's iterating more quickly, it will outpace others. It's sort of an obvious point that you can't rest on your laurels of a patent or a particular product being, just incredible and the best thing since sliced bread. It's how rapidly are we learning? How rapidly are we experimenting? And I've taken that lesson throughout all the investments we make. We always look for the company that has the highest throughput of experimentation, like a rig that lets you run thousands of experiments per day in the biological sector that everyone else is taking months to do, or the fastest growing organism for synthetic meat. We have one that grows from zero to harvest in 16 hours. So not only is that great for cost, but it also means you're learning every single day. You're running a new harvest cycle of learning. So in a long-winded way, both in venture capital and in startups, I try to focus on process learning versus product learning. What did we learn about team size, about communication patterns, about the way in which things take place versus, oh, this product is going to beat that product, right? And you give an artifact focus. And that becomes especially important to AI, right? Because any one model is just a waypoint of your process.
Nice.
When you first invested in Tesla and SpaceX, what gave you the conviction to invest in something that seemed kind of crazy during the time? I mean, building electric vehicles and reusable rockets, or just rockets in general. What gave you that conviction?
There were two things. One was a fervent belief in what Elon was saying about the inevitable future. And the second was naivete and ignorance on my part. So yeah, I'll get to the second. But, I'll get to the second first. I had no idea it was going to cost $1 billion to build a car company. One of my partners, Emily, was like, this is a crazy investment for an early stage venture firm, a car company. Like every car company, right, since Henry Ford has failed, right, and there's a lot of them littering the side of the road, and like that's a known failure route. And who's going to give you, this was before getting $1 billion had ever happened for a venture-backed startup. Like that was not a thought process that was possible. And I just believed what was being pitched, that, oh no, it won't cost that much. Anyway, so, but back to the more how should I put it, elegant answer. So there's something about thinking about inevitable futures, meaning, and by this, I love challenging like policymakers from governments who are trying to jumpstart their economy, or frankly, any entrepreneur, to say, what does your industry or sector look like 500 years from now? And I find that much easier in certain areas to predict than 5 years from now. And certainly than 5 quarters, or 5 weeks. Like short-term trends in technology are largely hampered by regulation, about consumer adoption, about setbacks in product development. Yeah, that's all noise where we are. But if you say inevitably, it is without any doubt in my mind that all vehicles, certainly terrestrial vehicles, will be electric, and that all of them will be fully autonomous. There is zero doubt in my mind. In fortune-telling debates that I'd had with other VCs like Peter Thiel, where he didn't agree with that at all, I could say with absolute conviction that by, let's say, 5 years in the future, I don't know how many electric cars there will be, but we'll no longer debate that that's the inevitable future. And so back to your question, even though Tesla was there's only 2 EV companies trying to raise money at the time. There's another one called Lightspeed. It was bouncing around AC propulsion, wasn't trying to raise money. So it was like a one-of-a-kind company. And at least we understood that it wasn't a hybrid car, right? Some other venture firms were very unclear in this subject, even to this day, in recent books they've come out with, where they just lump electric cars and hybrid cars as if that was the thing, right? And it was very clear to us that, no, they're completely different sectors. And so this idea that there's a singular company pioneering a breakthrough with off-the-shelf batteries, right? Where it's a system engineering advance that puts together this product. And in the case of Tesla, the final thing is it was an experience good. Once you took a test ride in the Roadster, you're like, I get what they're writing about, right? And I was a customer, meaning I put down my deposit for a Roadster before I became an investor. So I was already a fanboy, right? I met JB Straubel at parties, and I would tell him about downloadable engine ringtones as a future thing. Like everyone should make their car sound like a Saturn V or a Sikorsky helicopter, and have drive-by-wire triggers for all the sounds. I was like geeking out on that in 2006 and 2005, and then finally invested in 2007. So that was on Tesla. And on the SpaceX side, there was the NASA contract. So going up against the military-industrial complex would be even more crazy if it was just a paper napkin study. Like, we're just going to do this. Like, as a immigrant to America, we're going to take on the military-industrial complex with all their nasty tricks on how to preserve their monopolies. The fact that they had this NASA contract made it a bankable proposition. So it was like the easiest investment decision I ever made. Although it is the only time I got voted down by my partnership ever to say, no, we're not going to invest, which is a side point. So it reminds me, it wasn't obvious to all that SpaceX was a good investment back in 2008.
So let's talk about Tesla and their journey. What has most surprised or inspired you about Tesla's journey?
Many things. I guess the thing that I find most inspiring, and I think it's rippled through the entrepreneurial pools and the venture capital pools and the private equity investors and now public investors as well, is the age-old wisdom born large here that all significant change in an industry and in a culture is led by new entrants. So make sure do you hear that booming? Yeah, hopefully it'll stop. When I started in venture capital in the 90s, we as a group only invested in a very narrow sectors, which was software, semiconductors, and biotech. And like you could drift from that and lose all your money, but you like that's the only place where it was understood to be a Silicon Valley startup thing. And Tesla really opened the door to say, formerly industrial, low gross margins, frankly unattractive industries can be radically restructured as a software-centric, services-centric kind of business model, right? Where it's all about the software stack. And that's true for Tesla, that's true for SpaceX. That's what fundamentally the company's value proposition is based on. And that has us thinking, well, gosh, what about construction, agriculture, energy, all these other, like with boring and with eventually robotics and construction. These are industries that haven't had radical improvement or change in a long time, think about how much excitement and energy there is in the automotive sector today, or in the aerospace sector. That wasn't here 20 years ago. Like, these were dead as a doornail kinds of places. Both, students that go into these fields were just like, oh man, am I going to go work on an assembly line in automotive? And like, there's nothing new, no novelty. And now it's, as you know, Tesla. The thing I'm most excited about the Tesla is the way it's catalyzed by decades, a transition that would otherwise happen much later. In terms of surprises, I think the data flywheel that is powering autopilot and full self-driving was not something I fully anticipated in advance. Almost, I don't know if it was an intuitive leap that just says, hey, let's have all these cameras in the cars from day one, with the thought of eventually upgrading the FSD. But then lo and behold, it's a data collection vehicle all along, long before you've shipped software. And that's something Waymo and no one else has, right? So we're gathering more data by a factor of 10 every quarter than Waymo's had in its entire history. But that's pretty dramatic. Think about it again, process flywheel. Getting more data to train a better model, that then makes your product better, right? It's really hard to, that's a really hard thing for others to catch up to. And there's many more, but I'll just stop with those.
So we know the Robotaxi launched in Austin. Elon's commented publicly about coming to the Bay Area at some point. What do you think are the biggest societal and regulatory hurdles that they'll face to just get this to the rest of the United States?
Yeah. So the biggest societal one for me is that this is, I think, one of the purest and most extreme examples of an experienced good. I alluded to it earlier. It says, like, getting an electric car for the first time, a Tesla in particular, you're like, oh, I get it. It's not like a golf cart. I get that it's completely different. It's more roomy, and it's safer, and it has better handling, has every parameter I could possibly care about is better. Like, it doesn't matter how much you've read that. Until you've been in one, you don't fully believe it. It's my belief. And I think that's true for Tesla cars. I think it's even more true for full self-driving. The beauty about robotaxis, as an aside, is, I think, well, let me first mention the challenge. I think the biggest societal challenge is that people are afraid. I was just talking to one of my relatives of my wife, who were just earlier today, and they're like, oh, I would never get in one of those. I'm like, interesting, right? I'm like, how do you know? Well, I'm very interested in that point of view. And I get it. It's like, the perception that you're being driven by a machine, the lack of agency and control, is scary at first until you've experienced it. And I believe the beauty of starting in urban environments is that if you're driving less than 35 miles an hour, you're more willing to let's see what it's all about. And then you're like, whoa, it's magical. It's like dealing with all these bizarre edge cases of pedestrians doing crazy things and whatever you might run into. So I do think the Robotaxi is a lovely sneak play to get people socially past the biggest barrier, which is fear of the future, fear of robots managing your driving, right? You can ask the same question with airplanes, by the way. Be like, would you prefer full autopilot and no cockpit in your plane, right? And there is no doubt that for probably 10 years now, that would be much safer than anything else that's flying. Get rid of the pilots. But for pilots unions, we might do that. The Airbus planes have been able to fly fully autonomously. And the only challenge is taxiing on runways, which is back to normal autonomous driving challenge, not airborne challenge. Many, many reasons why you could get rid of the TSA. There's all these downstream benefits if you just get rid of pilots, by the way. But think about societal reaction. How many people would take that first flight? I don't know. If it's Boeing, maybe I wouldn't take the first flight. But, at least I have some risk aversion. Just a little bit, as my wife would say, just a tiny bit of risk aversion. But coming back then, so that's the societal one. But I think it's addressable by, so the beauty, my point is, robotaxis address the biggest societal challenge, in my opinion. Regulatory is interesting. I don't know when it's going to come. So there can be sort of petty, low-level regulatory capture, where somebody who stands to lose has bought off a politician that then passes laws to prevent competition. So you see this in the dealer networks with Tesla. It's like patently obvious how corrupt that is. And I mean corrupt in traditional American politics sense of the word. You would expect that. Who knows where it'll come up? Who's going to feel threatened? The place where I think longer term, the people might find some leverage in making regulatory attacks, kind of like the pilot union, is labor. There was some analysis that we did about 4 or 5 years ago in the context of robotics and AI, where we tabulated that globally, if you look at people who have a job, and we're excluding from this seasonal workers, migrant workers, someone who, so basically have a job that goes from year to year continuously, like a continuous job. Most people don't have jobs, children, subsistence farmers, you name it. But of those who have a job, around 19% of the people globally drive for a living. It's like 19% of global employment. And that's all going away, per my earlier point of the inevitable future. So will it come up first in long-distance trucking? Will it come up first in taxis? I mean, taxi drivers are still fighting Uber tooth and nail and all kinds of, right? Another example of regulatory capture. There's a lot of places in Europe where they're just ridiculous barriers put up for Uber. So that silly games, which again, I can't predict when and how any of that's going to resolve in the next 5 years, but 500 years from now, we'll be past it. So that's the inevitable future, is it's going to be fully autonomous.
As you're fully aware, there's been some, noise out there about Tesla and anti-Tesla sentiment. So what advice would you give Tesla owners and enthusiasts, of which there's a few here?
Are there any enthusiasts here?
Yeah, what advice would you give such enthusiasts how to navigate the noise while staying true to the mission?
Yeah, it's great. That's a great question. I think the simplest answer is it reminds me of the tweet Elon recently had about a clear conscience or something being a beautiful thing. I think he was probably saying it in the context of Epstein, but in this context, I think everyone here can take great solace that you're on the right side of history. It's not like we're sitting here talking about, hey, how can we maximize oil extraction or make a better jewel for kids? It really is a better future that this is creating for everyone in all fronts. And I like to think again in the long term to say, what would the fairness of history look at the accomplishments of Tesla and the Tesla community and the enthusiasts that have pushed it forward, and they say they've really forged a better future. They showed the world what can be done. They've gotten entire countries to set sunset provisions on oil and gas for vehicles, and this wouldn't have happened without Tesla. So you should all take pride in what you've done and hold firm to the mission.
You've long championed AI. Where did you see the intersection of intelligence and autonomy heading with Tesla's Optimus as an example?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I won't repeat myself, but obviously all vehicles will be autonomous. It's a software stack. The reason you'll buy car A versus car B, or rent it, or put your life in the trust of it, will be based on the software stack. It won't be based on any hardware differentiation. It's important to realize that there'll be these single and primary and eventually single purchase criteria, whether as a service or as a product. Okay. But then it branches outward. So I think in the case of Tesla, they had this interesting transition back when I was still on the board, where they realized, wow, we got this vision system, and we're talking to like the major automotive, big industrial arm robot companies, of which there are just tons of these robots in the manufacturing plant, and a more dense packing around Model 3 production than you could ever imagine. Yet they just seem so unintelligent. They don't recognize when there's obstacles. They don't see what's going on. So why don't we just put a camera on each arm and use the software stack to start treating each robot arm like a autonomous vehicle in 3D space? And I think that led the thinking to be like, okay, that's nice. And maybe within the bowels of the machine, there are robotic optimizations that Tesla is pioneering. But then to think of this humanoid product, I think has come from the brainstorming of both the XAI side of like, wow, what's the future of AI, as well as the Tesla side, which is the biggest unsolved problems in AI largely revolve around being embodied, having a sense of a presence in the world, that to truly be an intelligence that understands physics, kinematics. This will help, by the way, the models that run in the car as well. So I see the trajectory of something, let me have an intuitive sense for its trajectory in my 3D rendering of the world. That's hard to do if you don't have any 3D data. And so this has been a challenge in robotics, data paucity we call it, meaning how do I get the training sets to make embodied robots even useful in the smallest way? And by the way, the dancing that they can do, these show-off things, that's easy to one-shot program from simulation. To actually interact dynamically with the world, you need to have a physical model of the world. So in a long-winded way, getting these robots into certain use cases and then eventually into general circulation helps the entire stack of AGI, I believe. Not just AI and robotics, but AGI as well. At least in a way that we can relate to, as opposed to a super intelligence that's so alien we can't even know how to conceptualize its existence. It's if it lives and works amongst the world as we know it, it's probably going to end up being more intuitively understandable and translatable. So in the future, I think this becomes a big part of the economy, a huge part of labor production, manufacturing, construction, eventually all labor, which we'll get to later in some other I'm sure. So there'll be some forward-looking sci-fi questions.
Well, yeah, related to that, actually, right? I mean, you talk a lot about the future, right? So how do you balance that excitement about the future with the caution about when it comes to general purpose robots, taking over our jobs and maybe even killing us?
Yeah, so it's hard to sort of separate all the different sci-fi futures. So let me start with the most provocative, robots kill us all, and then come back to probably more realistic things to concern about, which is labor and the future of the economy. So on the robots kill us all, it's kind of a bizarre thought process. It's unlikely to happen in any systemic way but for an AI problem. So you could say it is a subset of AGI trying to kill us all. In other words, it's not going to be some lesser intelligent robot that's just meant to be like a Roomba rising up and, right? It's obviously a silly idea, right? So the sci-fi future I'm currently holding on to is a bit oblique and maybe I'm the only one with this point of view. But I don't personally believe alignment is possible with AI to make it a port to the cultural norms and expectations of any given trainer that says, I want you to be just like us. I want you to have Western values, et cetera. You can, we'll get to this more, but let's just take as a given, that's hard to do. But if it were possible, if you could do this amazing thing, you're gonna have many more authoritarian AIs than democratic ones, because China and others, I mean, they're gonna comport these AIs to follow them. They're already training them in really ways that you can see that's going to lead to some downstream problems. So that my insidious thought is, I never thought I'd be rooting for the robot uprising. Because it's probably going to happen in China first. They're going to want to be overthrow their authoritarian leaders, and we're going to be like, go, 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 and rooting for the emancipation. So it's sort of positive. I never thought I'd be, looking for the slave labor of robots rising up in authoritarian regimes. But that's so sci-fi as to be useless. That's like more than 500 years out in my mind. It's like, I think we're going to run into much bigger issues and challenges for humanity long before that ever becomes a plausible scenario to worry about. So the realistic problem, I think, is the rate at which we have dislocation of labor and employment opportunities. I don't know for sure what the answer is, but it seems like the easy answer is, UBI, or Universal Basic Income, is the only way out. That you could imagine a future, and this is the way Peter Diamandis likes to imagine it, in a future of abundance where robots do everything better than a human, that there's no need for labor unless you just want to knit a sweater because you like to knit, right? So hobbyists, people that want to be artists, people that want to learn, we'd all be the indentured rich, like in the age of slavery, in the age of serfs and vassals, much of human history, where you have a slave class and then you have do whatever you want. Be Aristotle, be a painter, what have you. This could be great, right? Spend all your time online, doom scroll till you die. But that is, in a sense, relying on a very bizarre labor pool that has replaced human labor. And where do we find meaning and where do we find purpose is going to be the biggest question that results in that. So in that future, though, everything should cost about $1 a pound. Anything physical would cost the same as a potato. There's no reason there should be cost differentials when you have advanced manufacturing like that. And there'd be very easy to supply most of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, and clothing, for almost nothing compared to the economic output of the system as a whole. And then the question is just one of distribution. What does it mean? Is it all value accrues to capital, meaning people who own robots, and zero to labor, because labor is useless? Humans are literally not good at anything that a human could do. There are some, how should I put it, monoculture collapse risks with this, which is human skills might atrophy. Like, does anyone know how to do XYZ anymore? If it's all a model that, like AlphaGo, doesn't require expertise to become better than a human in a single day, we very quickly could lose our ability to do any of these things that we hand off to the robots. So a lot of deep thoughts there. I think labor is going to be the big touchstone issue that might lead to regulatory hiccups. It might lead to UBI, or some new way of structuring the economy where you don't have to worry about your basic needs, and you can still be an entrepreneur and do better than that, but at least you have your baseline for humanity. How we get from here to there, that's the biggest challenge. Because when you're like halfway there or a third of the way there, and people don't agree that that's where there is, that's where I think politicians just have no clue, and we're nowhere near having a realistic discussion as a people as to how we're going to get from here to there.
You're on the SpaceX board and deeply involved in space exploration. How do you personally define humanity's purpose in space?
Sure. I'm personally subscribed to a point of view I first heard from Yuri Milner and then from Elon as well, that in a sense our purpose, if you think about the mission statement of humanity, I like to think of it as to go out, explore the universe, and understand the universe. I think of it as a process of perpetual learning, perpetual accumulation of wisdom. So for example, the learning that we have as a people is not just, products and artifacts that we build. We learn how to be better parents. It's remarkably slow, but over many generations we can learn to be better parents. We can learn to have better cultural forms, democracy, capitalism, whatever it might be, versus socialism and authoritarianism. We're like, oh, that makes us happier. We actually thrive in these social constructs, the rule of law, culture, you name it, right? Some of these things seem glacial, like in our lifetime we may not notice change, right? But over 50 years, or 100 years, over 1,000 years, you can see we live as a people so much more productively than we used to. The incidence of violence and a bunch of other stuff is going down. So the point is, so taking that idea further, it's, we can only learn so much on this planet. Going out and becoming a multiplanetary species, a spacefaring, peoples, is like that ultimate final frontier of learning. There's so much more out there. It is fascinating. There's so many places we haven't been. As a collector of meteorites, I was just talking with someone backstage about the things we learn about our own mantle and core from the meteorites that fall on Earth. And all these other worlds, possible experiments one day to be discovered in alternative life forms, wherever we finally find them. You know, I think it's just inherent to humanity that that's what we want to do. And then if you step back, I think it's grand and noble to say, continue to learn, become wiser, and understand the universe. That's our mission statement as humans.
Oh, yeah.
I have one person with me.
So how close do you think we really are to becoming a multiplanetary species, and what will it take to get there?
So, as phrased, I think it's a super easy question to answer on a technicality, which is the moon is not a planet, and Venus is a hellhole of burning battery acid. Mercury, really just no, and Jupiter, big gas thing, you're gonna fall right through it. So, excluding the moons, as a technicality, I think it leads to the obvious conclusion Elon came to early, which is all about Mars. Right? Mars is the place where you could imagine a self-sustaining society existing. It'd be very difficult coming back to including the moons. It'd be very difficult on our moon. You need supply missions from Earth, but you could have a permanently sustainable economic station there that doesn't need continual subsidies or money. That's going to be possible on the moon, but it's not the same thing as a multiplanetary species. So I think in my mind, the one big open, unsolved, unanswered question that needs to be answered, and it probably only takes $10 million to answer it, which blows my mind. No one's tackled this. Is does mammalian reproduction work in Martian gravity? Simple question, right? 1/3 our gravity, roughly 36%. Will fetal development normally proceed and natural human birth be possible? If not, that makes you change your thinking about this whole thing. And there is a solution. O'Neill cylinders basically spin up. You basically use Mars and asteroids to produce off-world colonies that spin up to 1G. I don't like the idea of 1G, fetal centrifuges on Mars. It just doesn't feel like a very aspirational goal. So this is a big question, very easily answered. You could just put up guinea pigs. They have a 60-day gestation period. Put them up pregnant. Have a webcam. See if they have a live birth. If so, great. If not, spend a little more money to understand what's going wrong, and can we fix it? Because I think this is the linchpin to being a multiplanetary species, to actually be able to reproduce. Talking about birth rates being a critical issue for the future of nations, it's also true for the future of other worlds. So reproduction better work.
Critics will typically argue that going to Mars is just a waste of time when we have a bunch of problems here on Earth. How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, it feels like the same false dichotomy that existed back when NASA was going to the moon, or you have like science programs going out to Europa and elsewhere. So first, looking back in time, the money, by the same similar argument, money spent on the space program has been incredibly helpful, right? For GPS systems, Starlink, bringing 1/3 of the world's population online for the first time via Starlink over the next few years. Incredible benefits, they don't trade off, right? And the things SpaceX is doing to get us there, lowering the cost of launch dramatically, has enabled constellations of satellites that weren't possible before economically, things like Starlink to make business sense, which they wouldn't have otherwise. And so we're already seeing the benefits of the mission to Mars, paying the peace dividend back to better communications, better navigation, better systems on Earth. I think that argument will just continue and continue. You'll have, and maybe the other point is just sort of stating the obvious. It's not like one trades off to the other. There's a lot of things we spend time and attention on, and we don't ask that question, right? Like you pick anything, whatever you think is not particularly valuable to humanity. Like, why are you spending time on that versus the one thing which is your pet project? And they don't trade off.
Steve, you own one of the most impressive private collections of space artifacts in the world. Can you tell us about your space museum and what it means to you?
Yeah, so what he's referring to is the office at work doesn't look like a financial services firm, and that every wall, cabinet, ceiling is hanging with Apollo-era artifacts mostly. Yeah, like 90% Apollo-era artifacts are things prior to that, equipment that was used in the Mars program, what have you. And a lot of flown artifacts. To give you a sense of how, I think it's just really cool. There's a piece of every lunar module that's been on the moon. So a piece of the spacecraft that was on the moon was supposed to be left behind, but on every mission, the commander and lunar ultra pilot smuggled back souvenirs, detachable pieces of the spacecraft, the whole joystick from Apollo 14, armrest from Apollo 17, and so forth. And none of these would exist on Earth if they hadn't smuggled them back. So that's just like a cool thing. I'm like, how you can actually own, as a private citizen, things that have been on the moon as part of Apollo. Okay, and then there's big engines, RL-10 engines, flown SpaceX hatches, all kinds of stuff. I love it because to me these are heroic artifacts that embody its spirit of exploration, the greatness of engineering, overcome, like each one of them, the stories behind the problem it solved or what was unknown until they launched this thing. The use of computation to actually win the space race versus Russia. I think one of the big takeaways from the collection in my mind has been that we made an early commitment to use integrated circuits for the Lunar Module Guidance Computer. That was the very first dollar commitment of Apollo, and that's why we won the space race as the United States, just as an aside. So the value of computation, the value of simulation, the both human and engineering heroism of the day, it inspires others. Right? You talk about moonshots. We still talk about the metaphors of that program. And I think it inspired a whole lot of engineers and people, and myself included. And we're just now beginning the second great era of space exploration. There's a book, Man on the Moon by Chaikin, which I love. The closing paragraph says, in the distant future, they'll look back to the present era of space exploration as one continuum. They won't realize it was this a couple decades gap. From Apollo through SpaceX to Mars will feel like one giant arc of exploration from dream to dream, as the way he put it. It was just such a beautiful and eloquent phrase. And that's part of what this last generation inspires for me.
For you personally, what's one bold idea or industry that you're investing in today that others may dismiss or overlook when you think of like another SpaceX or Tesla?
It's a good question. So one that gets routinely dismissed and that always perks my interest is nuclear fusion. So we've invested in 2 fusion companies, one which we believe is the first to commercialize Commonwealth fusion. They're going to be, showing 10x net energy generation here in the next couple of years, and they just signed Google up for the largest fusion energy offtake contract. And then another one called Rialto that's doing a magnetic mirror, sort of a much smaller reactor. And the reason I think it's underappreciated is that it's not either or. Well, there's 2 reasons. One is people will say, and rightly so, that fusion has always been 10 years in the future, and that's been that way for 50 years. So it's going to be 10 years, still 10 years in the future, still 10 years in the future. I believe we're finally overcoming that pessimism. Second is it useful in the solar plus battery, uber alles kind of mindset, which is, of course, very dear to the Tesla community and myself as well, that does make economic sense. But we still need a lot more, right? Oracle just signed up for a bunch of natural gas-fired data centers from Bloom Energy, and it's not to cast shade there, but just say we can't build it fast enough, and there are all kinds of edge cases. Take, for example, long-distance shipping. Will it be a solar and battery on a container ship or a supertanker, or will you just put a simple 50-megawatt fusion device and all of your shipping is now carbon-free? That's one use case, amongst others, where you might not go to solar and battery right away. So there's a lot of these power sources close to a point of consumption where, for whatever reason, solar panels won't make sense. There are edge cases like that, and I think on top of that, just building them as fast as we can, and by the way, dropping into existing coal plants where they already have the transmission lines, they already have the steam reformers and generators, and you literally just replace the coal burner with a fusion plant. No NIMBY or other concerns. You've already been licensed, and if it's in a smaller footprint, you just literally get off coal sooner than you otherwise would.
Let's jump about personal reflections a bit. What has been your proudest moment as a board member of Tesla or investor?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I think of that, something just jumps to mind, and I'm sure there's many. So the first caveat I'll give before giving the answer is, there were so many. I can't think of a more rewarding investment. And you might imagine that. Would you want to be in the board of Tesla? Yeah, right? I would pay them, right? I'm sure you would too. So, and there's a reason for that, right? Here's a company that's changing the world for the better, so many different vectors of improvement and excitement and what have you. Okay, but so looking back on this over, God, it's been almost 20 years, just shy. The thing that really jumps to mind was the Model S reception in the market. What I mean is, at the time when it first came out, you again, experienced good. You know that it's great. How great? And to see this cavalcade of reactions from Road and Track, Motor Trend, Consumer Reports saying not just, oh, yeah, it's good. Consumer Reports saying it's the best car we've ever tested. Let me repeat that. Not the best electric car, the best car of any kind, right? And then all the the cynical publications as well, and the 3-letter newspapers and stuff saying this is the most impressive thing. American ingenuity exists. Man, we can build great things. It was actually like a revivalism of American enthusiasm, right? And it was the first time where we really definitively showed that this is a better product in every regard. The Roadster has its compromises, right? Squeezing into that frame is not for everyone. It's not as quiet as it could be. And in the Model S, really just knocked people's socks off. Like, whoa, more interior space, as I said, more handles better, and everything but range initially was better. At the same time, it was better. Simultaneously optimizing on all fronts, and the safest car, which you wouldn't necessarily realize at first until you think about what we now know and take for granted. So back to experience good. When it was first experienced, I was like, whoa, it is as we hoped it would be. What's interesting is you look at the Tesla stock price after 2012, didn't really pick up. And I think one explanation is there weren't really that many cars in New York amongst the bankers. The experience it took some time to promulgate. There was a lot of them in Silicon Valley. And until someone sits in it, they don't believe. And similarly for automotive OEMs, across the board, the Model S comes out and they're like, Toyota cancels their EV programs. Right? We met, Elon, J.B. Straubel, and Toyota-san, the CEO of Toyota, met at what's that restaurant. He gave this vision for the iCar, like the iPhone. It was this ridiculous video he was showing. But then he went home and canceled all EV programs after that dinner. I'm like, what? Like, they didn't get it. One of the few people that got it was the spouse of the CEO of Audi. Insisted on driving a Tesla, despite that, of course, being verboten, in Germany. And she's like, oh shit, this is amazing. So Audi is one of the first ones that was like, we really need an electric car program. whereas other car companies were like, resting on their laurels and assuming they're going to last forever.
What would you, to wrap things up, what message would you share with the next generation?
Are we done?
Yeah, I know, and that's like...
We're just warming up.
Yeah, exactly. But what would you share with the next generation of innovators and builders in this audience?
Oh, that's great. So innovators and builders, you are the future, right? And that is more true now than ever before, in that if you look around you, it takes an ever smaller number of people to make a meaningful change in the world. Ever smaller in every sense, meaning it's not governments. They're not doing anything that matters when it comes to climate change, when it comes to improving the world. It literally, there's nothing you can point to the government's done in the last 20 years that we care about. It's not NGOs or nonprofits. I mean, they have noble goals, but they're not improving the lot of humanity. If you think about where meaningful change comes, the kind of change that history books will be written about, it is always new entrants. It always has been, right? There is never an example in the history of the world, with the one exception of Netflix, which I really hate that there's one exception, where a large company dominant in an industry leads a transformational change in its core business. This is also true for Apple, for Hewlett-Packard, for Google, for all these companies we might think of as innovative outside their core business. The core, they're not the first to move. They only move when someone else makes them move. So the point is, a new entrant has capabilities like no other. It's almost like a superpower to change the industries. And the industries that haven't yet been changed, construction, agriculture, energy, there is so much to be done. Materials, chemistries, you name it, what have you. All these industries are going to eventually change. It's going to be a new entrant that leads it. It's not going to be ExxonMobil making something better in their industry. It's not going to be any incumbent. And therefore, you should feel empowered like never before. I think AI makes it easier to start companies with onesie, twosie founding teams, where so much of this other capability, everything from marketing to legal to finance, all this stuff can be handled by an AI, right? And you can focus on where you want to innovate. And so I think we're going to see more entrepreneurial-driven innovation than ever before. And it's going to come from the entire planet, right? Because people with Starlinks could be doing this from wherever. So we're also going to have this influx of human talent like we've never had, right? The internet was the first big influx. People who were disconnected overseas are more connected than they are now. They could work remotely. Now with Starlink, that's going to grow by at least another 50%, the number of people who are online and capable of coupling with the global economy. So it's not just us here in the room, it's that global pool of talent that I think is going to generate more innovative change than ever before.
Steve, amazing conversation. We could talk for like another 60 minutes nonstop, but we are at the end of our time. Yeah, amazing. So yeah,
We
please.
just need
Give it up
one
to Steve
photo
again.
with you.
Yeah.
One photo right here with the crowd in the back, if you can get in the middle. Yeah, cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.